Okay, hello everyone. Today we're going to take a look at what Vandertramp verbs are. You might have heard this expression, and it's a bit of a weird idea. In French, what we have different verb tenses, so different times. So, say for example, you have I'm running, and I will run, and I ran, and I will have run. Those are different verb tenses. And in some of the verb tenses, some of the verbs are really awkward and horrible, and those are the Vandertramp verbs. And it's not like they got together when French was being created and they were like, hey, let's create havoc. I think just over time it just evolved where some were easier and some were harder. And what I guess English teachers, I don't know, whoever's teaching French at the time, they said, okay, well, let's kind of identify some of these verbs and create an acronym to try and remember them. And so what they did is they figured out all the verbs that were really kind of hard, and they took the first letter of all of them and they came up with the term Vandertramp. And then I guess they realized that there were more, and so it's actually like Dr. Mrs. Vandertramp is actually where this kind of comes from. But it's not like there's a doctor who's also married and is named Vandertramp and has anything to do with anything. It's just an acronym. Vandertramp means nothing. It's just a way to help us remember the different verbs. So again, there's really no point to Vandertramp verbs. They're just really complicated verbs, and we're going to try and figure out how they work and how to kind of make sense of them. So again, with Vandertramp verbs, they're like, I think 16 of them, totally unrelated verbs in terms of meaning, in terms of spelling. There's really nothing that they have in common, other than the fact that they're horrible and tricky to work with. And in the present tense, there are no Vandertramp verbs. Like, they're just irregular or regular. They fall into one of the two categories. So let me just kind of show you which ones they are. So here we have, oops, sorry. Get rid of the highlighting, whatever. This is the list of the Vandertramp verbs. So let me just read them off in case you guys can't actually see them. So we have to become, to come back, to go up, to stay, to go out, to come, to go, to be born, to go down, to enter, to re-enter, to fall, to return, to arrive, to die, and to leave. So that's it in English. That's what the translation is. Usually what happens in a school setting is what we do is we like draw a house and we like try and label people kind of coming and going, if that kind of makes sense, because you have like to enter and then to re-enter and then to come and to go. And then, like, I don't know, somebody dying in the house, somebody being born in the house, I don't know. But this is like a typical kind of classroom activity we do to try and remember what these verbs are. So how are they different? What happens is in some of the verb tenses is they exist, and in other verb tenses it's not even an issue, it's not even a problem. So say for example, like the futur proche, one of the nicer verb tenses, you don't have Vandertramp verbs, you don't have irregular verbs, you just simply have like just one way to conjugate the verbs in the futur proche. So the ones that I've highlighted in yellow, those are the ones that are really, really complicated. We have the passé composé, which most people learning the language have to learn the passé composé. And then we have three other verb tenses, which typically we don't learn as much of as the passé composé. We have the plus que parfait, which is something that is like the oldest action you can do, like I had fallen. Then we have the futur antérieur, which is the I will have fallen. And then we have the conditional passé, which is the I would have fallen. So again, not super, super common in like a basic regular French classroom setting, but we do eventually need to know them by the time you finish high school. So where it gets really complicated is, let's just right now look at the passé composé. The other verb tenses that I've highlighted in yellow follow the same sort of pattern. In the passé composé is we have, like, and I'm sure you might have heard these terms before if you're looking at this Vandertramp video, is we have regular verbs and we have irregular verbs and then we have Vandertramp verbs. And then if your teacher has time, I'm sure they talk to you about reflexive verbs. So what happens? Vandertramp verbs are different from regular and irregular verbs in that they conjugate with être instead of avoir. So usually, like, if you want to say like I had, you'd say j'ai eu, or like I liked, j'ai aimé, or I chose, j'ai choisi, and that's like regular, irregular, that works. The minute you have a Vandertramp verb, and again, there's no logic why. I think sometimes that's the biggest hurdle, is understanding in French that there's no real reason why something happens, it's happened, and that's how it is, and we just have to make sense of how it works. And so instead of using avoir as like your middle auxiliary verb, you use être. So say for example, it was like, I don't know, I entered. Instead of, it would be like, je suis entré. Normally, like, you want to say j'ai entré, because that's what like an irregular and a regular verb would do, is they take avoir as their middle verb. But in French, in the Vandertramp verbs, you have to use être. So if it's like I went, je suis allé, instead of j'ai allé. Or if it was like I died, je suis mort, but because I'm a girl, je suis morte, but whatever, instead of j'ai. So that's the kind of main difference, is what I've highlighted in blue, is that the middle word, the auxiliary verb, has to take être instead of avoir. The other tricky thing is that also the endings have to agree in terms of gender and number. And so what that means is if there's a girl, you add an extra E, and again, randomly, YE, who knows, it could have been like an R. But when French was made, I guess E just seemed like a logical thing to add on. They're like, oh, a girl, have an E. I don't know. And so it's always, if you're a girl, it's always an E, no matter how girly you are. You're not like super femme and you get like 2 E's. It's just like, the minute there's a girl, you get an E. And then if it's plural, then you add an S, which kind of makes sense in terms of like an English way of thinking, like plural people get an S. But it would be, think of it like, let's say, like, you know how we do in an adjective when we say they are happy. We don't say they are happies and add an S on, but kind of, it makes a little bit of sense. A little bit, not a ton, a little bit of sense. So that's what makes a Vandertramp verb different from the other verbs, is simply so that in these compound verb tenses, that the middle verb is no longer avoir, the middle verb is now être. And then the endings, if you're a girl, you get the S, and if you're plural, if you're a girl, you get an E, and if it's plural, you get an S. So that's all a Vandertramp verb is. It's nothing scary, it's just horrible, and there's not a lot of logic too behind it. It's just as the language evolved, just these 16 random verbs happen to be treated totally differently, and that's how it is. It's not like you're conveying more meaning or better meaning or a certain kind of meaning because you're using a Vandertramp verb. And again, maybe if you can find your own acronym, you can call it something totally different. It doesn't even have to be Vandertramp. So, but again, it's just a set of verbs that are super complicated and hard to deal with in a compound verb tense. There's no present tense Vandertramp. There is no future proche Vandertramp. There's no present participle Vandertramp. That does not exist. So again, just a collection of verbs that are complicated in those 4 verb tenses. So there you go. Hope it helps.